was once a young athlete who got injured. I experienced that whole frustration of not being able to play and not being able to pursue my dreams. But I was lucky. I found a career in physiotherapy, and over the last 35 years, I've been able to work with some amazing young athletes, helping them become the best that they can be. My two kids have both gone on to represent their country, and they were incredibly willing guinea pigs in helping me understand what it meant to change things, tweak the recipe, and find the things that worked for each of them to help them to become better. So I want to share with you some of the ingredients that I believe make the most powerful recipes. And hopefully that will stop you making some of the mistakes we did along the way, so that you can become the best that you can be. I think sporting success is about building a winning recipe. And much the same way as if we make a cake, we'll need to make it individual for your tastes. Not everybody likes the same cake. Not everybody has the same flavours that they want. And as such, we have to build your own winning recipe. If we don't know why we played really well, think back maybe to the last time that you think, I absolutely smashed it. I played so well. I performed so well. But what was it that made that day special? Do we remember what we ate that day? Do we remember what time we went to bed the night before? Do we remember how many hours of training we did in the week before that big performance that really, really came together? So if we've got a crazy dream and we want to reach for the sky, we need to make sure that we create a winning recipe that we can repeat over and over again. And on that journey, you're going to make so many mistakes. You're going to find out that sometimes a little bit more of this or a little bit less than of another ingredient might not make that recipe successful. But that's okay. Making those mistakes at the age you are now is what means that you've got a really robust recipe that comes out as a winning recipe when it really matters most as an adult. So I want you to start thinking about all of the ingredients that you need to put in to making sure that this recipe is successful for you. We'll talk today about how much is too much, how much training your body can cope with. We'll talk about recovery, sleep, and how much nutrition you need to produce winning performances. We'll talk about what the impact of not getting it quite right is on your health and well-being and your mental fitness. And so there's many aspects, and we can cover some of these in more detail. But today it's just about trying to make you think of all the things that you can control to ensure that you begin to progress in your sport and can reproduce those fantastic performances. So what might stop you achieving success? Well, like me, you might hurt yourself, you might get injured. But we also know that young athletes get absolutely exhausted and they burn out. So effectively, we've got to make sure that you understand all of the warning signs to stop that from happening. So let's think about why injuries and illness do occur. It's not too much training. We know that lots and lots of athletes do lots and lots of sport, but they don't seem to break down. And yet others who don't seem to do nearly as much, they sort of tend to develop illnesses and injuries. So we need to start to understand what it is that causes people to break down with injury or illness. And that might well be some training errors. We're going to look at how to monitor how much is too much. It may mean that you're not getting adequate recovery, particularly during growth spurts. The other aspect to it is that if you're stressed with academic things going on or things that are going on in your home life, it's been shown that you're much more likely to get injured. So we need to recognise that during exams, during growth spurts, these things are going to massively impact how much we can do, and we might need to moderate our training load and make sure we get more recovery or sleep during those periods. But other interesting research that's come out of late is the impact of too little fuel, as in too few calories, which is the energy of food, and sometimes even linking it to too little protein, which is what we build our muscles with to get stronger. We know that stronger athletes get less injuries, so building a really good platform of strength is key. So I want you to think about this little fact that when all those thousands of people do things like the London Marathon, do you think they did it without training? Do you think they did it without a plan? Well, I hope you're all shaking your heads at the moment, because we all know that that wouldn't be wise. You can't go and run 26 miles if you haven't done any training. So how do young athletes make a plan? What should we measure? Well, we need to start to record how much we do, how often we do it, how hard it was, as in how intensely we worked that day. Was it really hard on our body, or was it a light session? And given how much and how often and how hard, how much fuel do we need to create that winning performance? And afterwards, how do we reflect on how tired we were or how stressed we are during that particular day? So starting with load, we need to start to record everything that you do in a week. So all the activities, all the PE sessions, all the different strength sessions you might do, and maybe choose a metric. It could be that if you're a runner, you do it in miles. It could be if you're sort of hockey or football or rugby, you might do it in minutes. But it doesn't really matter as long as you use the same measuring tool for each particular activity. And what you'll see there is that we've also got the how hard, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But what we do know is that the research, although there's some question now as to how accurate it is, but what we are working on at the moment is the number of hours that you do in structured sport shouldn't exceed your age. So if you're 12 years old, you should only be doing 12 hours of structured sport a week. If you're 16, you should only be doing 16 hours. But we know that in sports like gymnastics and swimming, which get children to try and specialise and peak early, that could be almost double their age. And so we do need to recognise what impact that's going to have on performance and injuries. So it's not just about how much, it's also about how hard. So I want you to think about the last sort of sports activity you did. Let's think about maybe being a hockey player. And let's think about it being a school PE session that lasted 1 hour, so say 60 minutes. What score would you give that last session? It was a school PE session, so lots of different standards of children in it. And there's two ways that this might have gone. So let's think about whether, were you going to give it a score of maybe 4 out of 10? Where 10's the hardest thing you've ever done and 1 is you're still half asleep. So if we look at what 4 says, it says I was sweating a little, but I could still chat to my mates as I ran around. By 7, I'm sweating buckets and I'm panting, and I'm probably not able to carry on a normal conversation. So if we start to give our duration of our sessions a effort score, it creates what we call the load. It's how hard it was on your body. So let's say that we gave that school PE session a 4. So if it was 60 minutes and then we gave it an effort score of 4, then it was a load score of 240. But if that same 60-minute session was maybe done at a county session, and let's say now that we gave that an 8, well, what you can see that load score has now shot up to 60 times 8 is 480, so double the energy is going to be needed for that session, and maybe even double the recovery. So it's really important that you think about how hard sessions were, because certainly kids who just go at 10 out of 10, and we have to be careful because often our parents and our coaches say, do your best. But does your best mean always going at it at 10 out of 10 or 100%? Well, it doesn't, because it's going to be determined by so many different factors. So you need to have this spreadsheet. You need to have a record whereby you go, right, I've done a 60-minute session and today I've given it a 6 out of 10. So it's a 360 load. So you start to build up this pattern of how much you're doing and how hard it was on your body. And that will start to help you to understand whether you need to plug yourself back in like you do your mobile phone every night and maybe get more sleep or maybe take on more fuel. Because what you can do is start to track how much you've done over the last few weeks. Now, I've just made these figures up and made them nice and easy. But let's say in week 1, which will have been Perhaps, let's say it was the start of the year. So week 1 in January, you did a load score cumulatively of say 600. Week 2, 400. Week 3 was 5. Week 4 was 500. So if we add those up, that gives us 2,000, and we can divide that by 4 for the number of weeks that we're looking at. And what you'll start to see is that that's been an average score over the last few weeks of 500. And most of the research says that most people can add 10% to that quite happily without getting injured. But others will tolerate maybe 20% with no problem, whereas others might not even tolerate 10% when they're going through a big growth spurt, or perhaps when they're just back from injury. So we need to understand in our winning recipe, how much can we add to our load each week when we're building up like we do in that marathon training plan. So using the average of the last 4 weeks and then beginning to add, say, 10%, try 15% and see how you feel. Are you exhausted? Are you getting a few niggles? Because maybe that shows you it was too much. Or do you still feel great and you can push a little further? And each week you can knock off the oldest week and add the latest week to giving yourself an idea of what you've actually trained for and what you're ready for. So we've thought now about how much we can do and how hard it was. But just like a car, if you're going to drive it really, really fast and really, really hard, then you'll go through more petrol. If you drive it slowly at 50, then you actually conserve fuel and you can go much longer on the same tank. So that's just the same as you. We need to think about how many sort of calories, that's the energy intake we have in what we drink and what we eat, and compare that to how much we're going to use. And lots of kids need at least 2,000 to 4,000 calories, whereas their parents probably need a lot less than that. So you may find that your mum and dad aren't actually giving you enough food, just purely and simply because they think that you're smaller than them maybe. And maybe it's because they think of themselves and how much they need, but it may well be that you need a whole lot more. What we do know is that on this basis, you can unintentionally have too little fuel. And for a few athletes, they may intentionally be trying to actually lose weight or monitor their weight. So let's think about the unintentional ones. These are often when we're growing, and if you hear your mum speak, they'll say, well, I can't fill them up. They're always eating. I just can't seem to find anything that keeps them full for very long. And so you could easily be not getting enough fuel if you're doing 2 and 3 sports in a day. So those are what we call unintentional undereaters. And those are real risks for getting injured, for developing stress fractures and becoming overtrained or ill. And more seriously, we've got those that perhaps are involved in sports like rowing or sometimes gymnastics or dance, where perhaps they are being taught, sprinters, that maybe it's good to be light, it's good to be slim. And the danger then is that if your body thinks that it's not going to get any more fuel, it starts to conserve its energy and it starts to shut down systems like your reproductive system. So in girls, if they're not getting enough calories, either intentionally or unintentionally, what happens is the calcium leaks out of your bones and you may even find your periods stop. So you're really at risk of bone injuries, both to where the tendons join your bones and also to stress fractures. So these are really serious consequences that if we don't get enough calories and we don't get enough protein in our system, we can break down and underperform. So it's all about finding the right balance between how much we do, both mentally and physically, and how much recovery we're giving ourselves. Are we managing our stress levels well? Are we getting that good nutrition? Are we sleeping well and managing to refuel? So recovery days become really important. I call them my 4 R's: repair, rehydrate, refuel, and rest. And I can't emphasize enough how important all of these different bits are. We need to make sure that we're getting probably 20 grams of protein at breakfast. Even if you're quite small, you need really good protein to help build the muscles that you've been using over the last 24 hours. And if you're doing any strength work, you need that protein to try and build those healthy muscles to make you stronger. And we need that protein and carbohydrates to start creating repair. But importantly, it's when we sleep that we build new muscles, we build our new skills, and we make sure that we do any repair work, a little bit like when you plug your mobile phone in and you put it on to recharge. So what happens when that balance is wrong? We start to get tired. We call it low energy availability. And this is when we start to get lots of recurrent sore throats. We may start to get lots of bony injuries, such as severs, or you may have heard of Osgood-Schlatters. People start to get hip pain, and we start to see stress fractures in the lower back. And we also may find that we're beginning to feel much more grumpy and stressed. And all of these occur before we start to underperform. And generally, once we start to underperform by maybe 10%, it takes months to recover from this. So it's so important that we're tracking how we're feeling. So if you're starting to get lots of niggly injuries, you're feeling absolutely exhausted at school, maybe you're yawning lots, and ironically, even when we start to need more sleep, the more stressed we are, the more adrenaline we've got running around our body, and actually our sleep quality suffers. And even if we're sort of exhausted after a late night training session, we're often too buzzy and wired to be able to go to sleep. Those recurrent sore throats, recurrent viruses kick in. We mentioned that your periods may become irregular if they've started, or if you're still not started and you're heading towards 15, 16, that may be because you're not quite getting this balance right. Our stress levels may go up, and as I say, we'll get this drop off in performance. So how do you work out how to make sure that you don't go down that route? And you can use lots of different wellness scores, but here's a nice simple one, and you can either use 3 or 4 of these different metrics and adapt the figures. But if we were to say to you, right, on a day-by-day basis, how tired are you out of 5? 5's buzzing around like a Duracell bunny. 1, absolutely shattered. Sleep quality, feels so refreshed when I wake up. That's a 5. 1, absolutely horrendous, feeling so tired, feel like I still need to go to bed. How sore am I? Am I really struggling after a heavy session yesterday? That would be a 1 or a 2, versus I feel great, that's a 5. And then looking at your grumpiness score. Parents are often really good at scoring that one for you. And what you can do then, let's say you use all 4, you can then start to look and say, right, out of 5, how did I do? And if I'm right up there scoring 18, 19, 20, well, I'm fit to go. I'm absolutely fine to train hard. However, if I'm down there in the 1s and the 2s and overall I don't even score an 8, I would suggest you go home, you get caught up on sleep, food, homework, have a nice hot bath and relax, because you're heading for burnout and injury. And if you work with your parents and your coaches on these scores, you'll begin to learn what works for you, because it is all different. It's not a categoric 8 or a categoric 12. But what you can realise is if you're in the middle bands, you could talk to your coach and say, look, not feeling great today for whatever reason, not really sure why. Maybe it's exams, maybe I'm just feeling a bit under the weather. But can I come and do a more technical based score and maybe don't work so hard? So it's all good to be able to monitor just how much stress you're putting on your body. Because what we know is some kids seem to fly through growth without any problems, and yet others don't. Stronger athletes definitely do better, but growth can cause chaos. That whole maturation period when people are going through that big growth spurt, they're beginning to put on maybe some weight around that peak growth spurt, and perhaps their limbs are longer and you just don't feel as coordinated, and inevitably it's going to be tougher. We know that you need more fuel when you're growing, so again, that may be one of the causes. But we also understand that being stressed, not eating correctly, not sleeping as well as you could, and not planning enough recovery time is much more likely to end in disaster. So let's make a plan. Let's decide that some of these 10 may be in your recipe. So let's start to really plan how much we're going to do each week. Avoid those spikes in workload where maybe there's just been a big calendar congestion and now suddenly, instead of going up by 10 and 15% a week, suddenly it's like a 50% increase. You need to plan ahead and work out where those congested timetables are, and really, really make sure that you communicate with your coaches to make sure that you're not overdoing it. Limit those training hours to the age that you are now, and really prioritise. If you're feeling a little bit weary, then either plan some more rest days or just prioritise quality over quantity. Really pay attention to what you eat, make sure you get really good quality sleep, and start to develop a really good foundation of fitness and strength. By tracking your growth, you'll help yourself to be able to understand what your body's doing. But mostly just be kind to you. Be kind with your self-talk. Start to really be nice to you. Believe in yourself, because your brain is always listening. But listen to your body as well. If it's telling you it's struggling, then listen to it and let it have a bit of a break. Because what we know is there is no rush. In this study on Danish young athletes, those that carried on doing several sports, they didn't get too specialised too early, went on to outstrip those that specialised around the age of 11. So it's really important that you keep doing a broad version of different sports to build different muscles and different skills. And don't be in too much of a hurry to medal as a child. Only 20% of those athletes that represented their country at under 18 ever go on to become full internationals at senior level. And you turn that round, it means 80% of the kids never reached a national age group title. But they all succeeded when they needed to as adults. So don't be in a rush. Start really enjoying the training you're doing. Start really playing with this recipe and understand what works for you. What's the best food for you on a match day? What's the best sleep ratios? How do you train best for you? And enjoy it. I post loads of things on my social media, which is Angie J Physio on Instagram and Twitter. Do follow me, and I'll hopefully be able to give you lots of tips along the way to help your athlete development and help you become the best that you can be.